In this concluding part of the Golden Bow, I have discussed a problem which gives its title to the whole work. If I am right, the golden bow over which the King of the Wood, Diana's priest, at Aritzia kept watch and ward, was no other than a branch of mistletoe growing on an oak within the sacred grove. And as the plucking of the bow was a necessary prelude to the slaughter of the priest, I have been led to institute a parallel between the King of the Wood at Nemi and the Norse god Balder, who was worshipped in a sacred grove beside the beautiful Sogne fjord of Norway, and was said to have perished by a stroke of mistletoe, which alone of all things on earth or in heaven could wound him. On the theory here suggested, both Balder and the King of the Wood personified in a sense the sacred oak of our Aryan forefathers, and both had deposited their lives or souls for safety in the parasite which sometimes, though rarely, is found growing on an oak, and by the very rarity of its appearance excites the wonder and stimulates the devotion of ignorant men. Though I am now less than ever disposed to lay weight on the analogy between the Italian priest and the Norse god, I have allowed it to stand because it furnishes me with a pretext for discussing not only the general question of the external soul in popular superstition, but also the fire festivals of Europe, the fire festivals of Europe, the fire festivals of Europe, since fire played a part both in the myth of Balder and in the ritual of the Aritzian Grove. Thus, Balder, beautiful, in my hands is little more than a stalking horse to carry 2 heavy packloads of facts. Thus, Balder the Beautiful, in my hands, is little more than a talking horse to carry 2 heavy packloads of facts. And what is true of Balder applies equally to the priest of Nemi himself, the nominal hero of the long tragedy of human folly and suffering which has unrolled itself before the readers of these volumes, and on which the curtain is now about to fall. He, too, for all the quaint garb he wears and the gravity with which he stalks across the stage, is merely a puppet, and it is time to unmask him before laying him up in the box. To drop metaphor, while nominally investigating a particular problem of ancient mythology, I have really been discussing questions of more general interest which concern the gradual evolution of human thoughts from savagery to civilization. The inquiry is beset with difficulties of many kinds, for the record of man's mental development is even more imperfect than the record of his physical development, and it is harder to read, not only by reason of the incomparably more subtle and complex nature of the subject, but because the reader's eyes are apt to be dimmed by thick mists of passion and prejudice, which cloud in a far less degree the fields of comparative anatomy and geology. My contribution to the history of the human mind consists of the little more than a rough and purely provisional classification of facts, gathered almost entirely from print sources. printed sources. If there is one general conclusion which seems to emerge from the mass of particulars, I venture to think that it is the essential similarity in the working of the less developed human mind among all races, which corresponds to the essential similarity in the bodily frame revealed by comparative anatomy. But while this general mental similarity may, I believe, be taken as established, we must always be on our guard against tracing it to a multitude of particular resemblances, which may be, and often are, due to simple diffusion, since nothing is more certain than that the various races of men have borrowed from each other many of their arts and crafts, their ideas, customs, and institutions. To sift out the elements of culture which a race has independently evolved, and to diminish them accurately from those which it has derived from other races, is a task of extreme difficulty and delicacy, which promises to occupy students of man for a long time to come. Indeed, so complex are the facts, and so imperfect in most cases is the historical record, that it may be doubted whether, in regard to many of the lower races, we shall ever arrive at more than probable conjectures. Since the last edition of The Golden Bow was published some 13 years ago, I have seen reason to change my views on several matters discussed in this concluding part of the work, and though I have called attention to these changes in the text, it may be well for the sake of clearness and to recapitulate them here. In the first place, the arguments of Dr. Edward Westermarck have satisfied me that the solar theory of the European fire festivals, which I accepted from W. Mannhardt, is very slightly, if at all, supported by the evidence and is probably erroneous. The true explanation of the festivals I now believe to be the one advocated by Dr. Westermarck himself, namely that they are purificatory in intention, and purificatory in intention, and purificatory in intention. Purificatory in intention. Purificatory in intention. The fire being designed, as I formerly held, to reinforce the sun's light and heat by sympathetic magic, but merely to burn, merely to burn or repel the nauseous stings, whether conceived as material or spiritual, which threaten the life of man, of animals, and of plants. This aspect of the fire festivals had not wholly escaped me in former editions. I pointed it out explicitly, but, biased perhaps by the great authority of Mannhardt, I treated it as secondary and subordinate instead of primary and dominant, out of deference to Mannhardt, for whose work I entertain the highest respect, and because the evidence for the purificatory theory of the fires is perhaps not quite conclusive. I have, in this edition, repeated and even reinforced the arguments for the solar theory of the festivals, so that the reader may see for himself what can be said on both sides of the question, and may draw his own conclusion. But for my part, I cannot think that the arguments for the purificatory theory far outweigh the arguments for the solar theory. Dr. Westermarck based his criticisms largely on his own observations of the Mohammedan fire festivals of Morocco, which present a remarkable resemblance to those of Christian Europe, though there seems no reason to assume that Hurrian Africa has borrowed from Europe or Europe from Africa. So far as Europe is concerned, the evidence tends strongly to show that the grand evil which the festivals aimed at combating was witchcraft, and that they were conceived to attain their end by actually burning the witches, whether visible or invisible, in the flames. If that was so, the wide prevalence and the immense popularity of the fire festivals provides us with a measure for estimating the extent of the hold which the belief in witchcraft had on the European mind before the rise of Christianity, or rather of rationalism. For Christianity, both Catholic and Protestant, accepted the old belief and enforced it the old way by the faggot and the stake. It was not until human reason at last awoke After the long slumber of the Middle Ages, that this dreadful obsession gradually passed away like a dark cloud from the intellectual horizon of Europe, from the intellectual horizon of Europe, from the intellectual horizon of Europe. Yet we should deceive ourselves if we imagine that the belief in witchcraft is even now dead. Yet we should deceive ourselves if we imagined that the belief in witchcraft is now dead in the mass of the people. On the contrary, there is ample evidence to show that it only hibernates under the chilling influence of rationalism, and that it will start into active life if that influence were ever seriously relaxed. The truth seems to be that to this day the peasant remains a pagan and a savage at heart, and a savage at heart, and a savage at heart. His civilization is merely a thin veneer, which the hard knocks of life soon abrade, exposing the solid core of paganism and savagery below. The danger created by a bottomless layer of ignorance and superstition under the crust of civilized society is lessened not only by the natural torpidity and inertia of the bucolic mind, but also by the progressive decrease of the rural as compared with the urban population in modern states. For I believe it will be found that the artisans who congregate in towns are far less retentive of primitive modes of thought than their rustic brethren. In every age, cities have been the centers, and as it were, the lighthouses from which ideas radiate into the surrounding darkness, kindled by the friction of the mind with mind, friction of mind with mind, and the crowded haunts, of men, and it is natural that at these beacons of intellectual light, all should partake in some measure of the general illumination. No doubt, the mental ferment and unrest of great cities have their dark, as well as their bright side. But among the evils to be apprehended from them, the chances of a pagan revival need hardly be reckoned. Another point on which I have changed my mind is the nature of the great Aryan god whom the Romans called Jupiter and the Greeks Zeus, whereas I formerly argued that he was primarily a personification of the sacred oak, and only in the second place a personification of the thundering sky. I now invert the order of his divine functions and believe that he was a sky god before he came to be associated with the oak. In fact, I revert to the traditional view of Jupiter, recant my heresy, and I am gathered like a lost sheep into the fold of mythological orthodoxy. The good shepherd who has brought me back is my friend Mr. W. Ward Fowler. He has removed the stone over which I stumbled in the wilderness by explaining in a simple and natural way how a god of the thundering sky might easily come to be afterwards associated with the oak. The explanation turns on the great frequency with which, as statistics prove, the oak is struck by lightning beyond any other tree of the wood in Europe. to our rude forefathers who dwelt in the gloomy depths. To our rude forefathers, who dwelt in the gloomy depths of the primeval forest, it might well seem that the riven and blackened oaks must indeed be favorites of the sky god, who so often descended on them from the murky cloud in a flash of lightning and a crash of thunder. This change of view as to the great Aryan god necessarily affects my interpretation of the king of the wood, the priest of Diana at Aritzia, if I may take that discarded puppet out of the box again for a moment. On my theory, the priest represented Jupiter in the flesh, and accordingly, if Jupiter was primarily a sky god, his priest cannot have been a mere incarnation of the sacred oak, but must, like the deity whose commission he bore, have been invested in the imagination of his worshippers with the power of overcasting the heaven with clouds, and eliciting storms of thunder and rain from the celestial vault. The attribution of weather-making powers to kings or priests is very common in primitive society, and is indeed one of the principal levers by which such personages raise themselves to a position of superiority above their fellows. There is therefore no improbability in the supposition that, as a representative of Jupiter, the priest of Diana enjoyed this reputation, though positive evidence of it appears to be lacking. Lastly, in the present edition I have shown some grounds for thinking that the golden bow itself, or in common parlance, the mistletoe on the oak, was supposed to have dropped from the sky upon the tree in a flash of lightning, and therefore to contain within itself the seed of celestial fire, a sort of a smoldering thunderbolt. This view of the priest and of the bow, which he guarded at the peril of his life, has the advantage of accounting for the importance which the sanctuary at Nemi acquired, and the treasure which it amassed through the offerings of the faithful, offerings of the faithful, and the treasure which it amassed through the offerings of the faithful. For the shrine would seem to have been to the ancient what Loreto has been to modern Italy, a place of pilgrimage where princes and nobles as well as commoners poured wealth into the coffers of Diana in her green recess among the Alban hills, just as in modern times kings and queens vied with each other in enriching the Black Virgin, who from her holy house on the hillside at Loreto looks out on the blue Adriatic and the purple Apennines. Such pious prodigality becomes more intelligible if the greatest of the gods was indeed believed to dwell in human shape with his wife among the woods of Nemi. These are the principal points on which I have altered my opinion since the last edition of my book was published. The mere admission of such changes may suffice to indicate the doubt and uncertainty which attend inquiries of this nature. The whole fabric of ancient mythology is so foreign to our modern ways of thought. The whole fabric of ancient mythology is so foreign to our modern ways of thought. And the evidence concerning it is, for the most part, so fragmentary, obscure, and conflicting that in our attempts to piece together and interpret it, we can hardly hope to reach conclusions that will completely satisfy either ourselves or others. In this, as in other branches of study, it is the fate of theories to be washed away like children's castles of sand by the rising tide of knowledge. And I am not so presumptuous as to expect or desire for mine an exemption from the common lot. I hold them all very lightly and have used them chiefly as convenient pegs on which to hang my collections of facts. For I believe that, while theories are transitory, a record of facts has a permanent value, and that as a chronicle of ancient customs and beliefs, my book may retain its utility when my theories are as obsolete as the customs and beliefs themselves deserve to be. I cannot dismiss, without some natural regret, a task which has occupied and amused me at intervals for many years. But the regret is tempered by thankfulness and hope. I am thankful that I have been able to conclude at least one chapter of the work I projected a long time ago. I am hopeful that I may not now be taking a final leave of my indulgent readers, but that as I am sensible of little abatement of my bodily strength and of none in my ardor for study, they will bear with me yet a while. If I should attempt to entertain them with fresh subjects of laughter and tears drawn from the comedy and the tragedy of man's endless quest after happiness and truth. J.G. Fraser, Cambridge, 17 October, 1913. Between heaven and earth, not to touch the earth. We have traveled far since we turned our backs on Nemi and set forth in quest of the secret of the golden bow. With the present volume, we enter on the last stage of our long journey. The reader who has had the patience to follow the enquiry thus far may remember that at the outset 2 questions were proposed for answer. Why had the priest of Aritzia to slay his predecessor, and why, before doing so, had he to pluck the golden bow? Of these 2 questions, the first has now been answered. The priest of Aritzia, if I am right, was one of those sacred kings or human divinities on whose life the welfare of the community and even the course of nature in general are believed to be intimately dependent. It does not appear that the subjects or worshippers of such a spiritual potentate form to themselves any very clear notion of the exact relationship in which they stand to him. Probably their ideas on the point are vague and fluctuating, and we should err if we attempted to define the relationship with logical precision. All that the people know or rather imagine is that somehow, they themselves, their cattle and their crops are mysteriously bound up with their divine king, so that, according as he is well or ill, the community is healthy or sickly, the flocks and herds thrive or languish with disease, and the fields yield an abundant or a scanty harvest. The worst evil which they can conceive of is the natural death of the ruler, whether he succumb to sickness or old age, for in the opinion of his followers, such a death would entail the most disastrous consequences on themselves and their possessions. Fatal epidemics would sweep away man and beast. The earth would refuse her increase. Nay, the very frame of nature itself might be dissolved. To guard against these catastrophes, it is necessary to put the king to death. Put the king to death while he is still in the full bloom of his divine manhood, in order that his sacred life, transmitted in unabated force to his successor, may renew its youth, and thus by successive transmission through a perpetual line of vigorous incarnations may remain
eternally flesh and young, eternally flesh and young, a pledge and security that men and animals shall in like manner renew their use by a perpetual succession of generations, and that the seed time and harvest and summer and winter and rain and sunshine shall never fail, shall never fail, shall never fail.
That, if my conjecture is right, was why the priest of Aritzia, the king of the wood at Nemi, had regularly to perish by the sword of his successor. But we have still to ask, what was the golden bow? What was the golden bow, and why had each candidate for the Aritzian priesthood to pluck it before he could slay the priest? These questions I will now try to answer. It will be well to begin by noticing two of those rules or taboos by which, as we have seen, the life of divine kings or priests is regulated. The first of the rules to which I desire to call the reader's attention is that the divine personage may not touch the ground with his foot. This rule was observed by the Supreme Pontiff
of the Zapotecs in Mexico. Mexico, the Supreme Pontiff of the Zapotecs in Mexico. He profaned his sanctity, and he so much as touched the ground with his foot. Montezuma, Emperor of Mexico. Montezuma, Emperor of Mexico, Mexico, Emperor, Emperor of Mexico. Never set foot on the ground. He was always carried on the shoulders of noblemen, and if he lighted anywhere, they lay rich tapestry for him to walk upon. For the Mikado of Japan to touch the ground with his foot was a shameful degradation. Indeed, in the 16th century, it was enough to deprive him of his office. Outside his palace, he was carried on men's shoulders. Within it, he walked on exquisitely wrought mats. The king and queen of Tahiti might not touch the ground anywhere but within their hereditary domains, for the ground on which they trod became sacred. The ground on which they trod became sacred. In traveling from place to place, they were carried on the shoulders of sacred men. They were always accompanied by several pairs of these sanctified attendants. And when it became necessary to change their bearers, the king and queen vaulted on the shoulders of their new bearers without letting their feet touch the ground. It was an evil omen if the king of Tosuma touched the ground, and he had to perform an expiatory ceremony. Within his palace, the king of Persia walked on carpets on which no one else might tread. Outside of it, he was never seen on foot, but only in a chariot or on horseback. In old days, the king of Siam never set foot upon the earth, but was carried on a throne of gold from place to place. Formerly, neither the kings of Uganda nor their mothers, nor their queens might walk on foot outside of the spacious enclosures in which they lived. Whenever they went forth, they were carried on the shoulders of men of the Buffalo clan, several of whom accompanied any of these royal personages on a journey and took it in turn to bear the burden. The king sat astride the bearer's neck with a leg over each shoulder and his feet tucked under the bearer's arms. When one of these royal carriers grew tired, he shut the king on the shoulders of a second man, without allowing the royal feet to touch the ground. In this way they went at a great pace and traveled long distances in a day when the king was on a journey. The bearers had a special hut in the king's enclosure, in order to be at hand the moment they were wanted. Compare El Dekle, 3 years in savage Africa. London, 1898. Before horses had been introduced into Uganda, the king and his mother never walked, but always went about perched astride the shoulders of a slave. A most ludicrous sight. In this way they often traveled hundreds of miles. The use both of horses and of chariots by royal personages may often have been intended to prevent their sacred feet from touching the ground. Among the Bakuba, or rather Bushongo, a nation in the southern region of the Congo, down to a few years ago, persons of the royal blood were forbidden to touch the ground. They must sit on a hide a chair or the back of a slave who crouched on hands and feet. Their feet rested on the feet of others. When they traveled, they were carried on the backs of men, but the king journeyed in a litter supported on shafts. Among the Igbo people about Oka in southern Nigeria, the priest of the earth has to observe many taboos. For example, he may not see a corpse, and if he meets one on the road, he must hide his eyes with his wristlet. He must abstain from many foods such as eggs, birds of all sorts, mutton, dog, bush, buck, and so forth. He may neither wear nor touch a mask, and no masked man may enter his house. If a dog enters his house, it is killed and thrown out. As priest of the earth, he may not sit on the bare ground nor eat things that have fallen on the ground, nor may earth be thrown at him. According to ancient Brahmanic ritual, a king at his inauguration trod on a tiger skin and a golden plate. He was shod with shoes of boar skin, and so long as he lived thereafter, he might not stand on the earth with his bare feet. But besides, persons who are permanently sacred or tabooed and are therefore permanently forbidden to touch the ground with their feet. There are others who enjoy the character of sanctity or taboo only on certain occasions, and to whom accordingly the prohibition in question only applies at the definite seasons during which they exhale the odor of sanctity. Only applies at the definite seasons during which they exhale the odor of sanctity. Thus among the Kayans of Bauhaus or of Central Borneo, while the priestesses are engaged in the performance of certain rites, they may not step on the ground, and boards are laid for them to tread on. At a funeral ceremony observed by night among the Michemis, a Tibetan tribe near the northern frontier of Assam, a priest fantastically bedecked with tiger's teeth, many-colored plumes, bells, and shells executed a wild dance for the purpose of exorcising the evil spirits. Then all fires were extinguished, and a new light was struck by a man suspended by his feet from a beam in the ceiling. He did not touch the ground, we are told, in order to indicate that the light came from heaven, heaven, heaven. Again, newly born infants are strongly tabooed. Accordingly, in Loango, they are not allowed to touch the earth. With the Dayaks of Landak and Tajan, 2 districts of Dutch Borneo, it is a custom that for a certain time after marriage, neither bride nor bridegroom may tread on the earth. Warriors, again, on the warpath are surrounded, so to say, by an atmosphere of taboo. Hence, some Indians of North America might not sit on the bare ground the whole time they were out on a warlike expedition. In Laos, the hunting of elephants gave rise to many taboos. One of them is that the chief hunter may not touch the earth with his foot. Accordingly, when he alights from his elephant, the others spread a carpet of leaves for him to step upon. German Weissacres recommended that when witches were led to the block or the stake, they should not be allowed to touch the bare earth. And a reason suggested for the rule was that if they touched the earth, they might make themselves invisible and so escape. The sagacious author of the striped petticoat philosophy in the 18th century ridicules the idea as mere silly talk. Silly talk! He admits, indeed, that the women were conveyed to the place of execution in carts, but he denies that there is any deep significance in the cart, and he is prepared to maintain this view by a chemical analysis of the timber of which the cart was built. To clinch this argument, he appeals to plain matter-of-fact and his own personal experience. Not a single instance, he assures us with apparent satisfaction, can be produced of a witch who escaped the axe or the fire in this fashion. I have myself, says he, in my youth seen divers witches burned, some at Arnstad, some at Ilmenau, some at Schwenda, a noble village between Arnstad and Ilmenau, and some of them were pardoned and beheaded before being burned. They were laid on the earth in the place of execution and beheaded like any other poor sinner, whereas if they could have escaped by touching the earth, not one of them would have failed to do so. Apparently, holiness, magical virtue, taboo, or whatever we may call that mysterious quality which is supposed to pervade sacred or tabooed persons, is conceived by the primitive philosopher as a physical substance or fluid which with which the sacred man is charged, just as a Leyden jar is charged with electricity. And exactly as the electricity in the jar can be discharged by contact with a good conductor, so the holiness or magical virtue in the man can be discharged and drained away by contact with the earth, which on this theory serves as an excellent conductor for the magical fluid. Hence, in order to preserve the charge from running to waste, the sacred or tabooed personage must be carefully prevented from touching the ground. In electrical language, he must be insulated if he is not to be emptied of the precious substance or fluid with which he, as a vial, is filled to the brim. And in many cases, apparently, the insulation of the tabooed person is recommended as a precaution, not merely for his own sake, but for the sake of others. But for the sake of others. But for the sake of others. For since the virtue of holiness or taboo is to say a powerful explosive which the smallest touch may detonate, it is necessary in the interest of the general safety to keep it within narrow bounds, lest breaking out it should blast, blight, and destroy whatever it comes in contact with. For since the virtue of holiness, or taboo, is, so to say, a powerful explosive which the smallest touch may detonate, it is necessary in the interest of the general safety to keep it within narrow bounds, lest breaking out it should blast, blight, and destroy whatever it comes into contact with. But things as well as persons are often charged with the mysterious quality of holiness or taboo. Hence, it frequently becomes necessary for similar reasons to guard them also from coming into contact with the crown, lest they should in like manner be drained of their valuable properties and be reduced to mere commonplace material objects, empty husks from which the good grain has been eliminated. Thus, for example, the most sacred object of the Arunta tribe in Central Australia is, or rather used to be, a pole about 20 feet high, which is completely smeared with human blood, crowned with an imitation of a human head, and set up on the ground where the final initiatory ceremonies of young men are performed. Where the final initiatory ceremonies of young men are performed. A young gum tree is chosen to form the pole, and it must be cut down and transported in such a way that it does not touch the earth till it is erected in its place on the holy ground. Apparently, the pole represents some famous ancestor of olden time.
Again, at a great dancing festival celebrated by the natives of Bartle Bay in British New Guinea, a wild mango tree plays a prominent part. The tree must be self-sown, that is really wild and so young that it has never flowered. It is chosen in the jungle some 5 or 6 weeks before the festival, and a circle is cleared round its trunk. From that time, the master of the ceremonies and some 8 to 20 other men who have aided in choosing the tree and in clearing the jungle become strictly holy or tabooed. They sleep by themselves in a house into which no one else may intrude. They may not wash or drink water, nor even allow it accidentally to touch their bodies. They are forbidden to eat boiled food and the fruit of mango trees. They may drink only the milk of a young coconut, which has been baked, and they may eat certain fruits and vegetables such as Karika papaya, and pawpaws, and sugar cane, but only on condition that they have been baked. All refuse of their food is kept in baskets in their sleeping house and may not be removed from it till the festival is over. At the time when the men begin to observe these rules of abstinence, some 6 to 10 women, members of the same clan as the master of the ceremonies, enter on a like period of mortification, avoiding the company of the other sex and refraining from water, all boiled food, and the fruit of the mango tree. These fasting men and women are the principal dancers at the festival. The dancing takes place on a special platform in a temporary village which has been erected for the purpose. When the platform is about to be set up, the fasting men rub the stepping posts and then suck their hands for the purpose of extracting the ghost of any dead man that might chance to be in the post and might be injured by the weight of the platform pressing down on him. Having carefully extracted these poor souls, the men carry them away tenderly and set them free in the forest toward the long grass. On the day before the festival, one of the fasting men cuts down the chosen mango tree in the jungle with a stone adze, which is never afterwards put to any other use. An iron tool may not be used for the purpose, though iron tools are now common enough in the district. In cutting down the mango, they place nets on the ground to catch any leaves or twigs that might fall from the tree as it is being felled, and they surround the trunk with new mats to receive the chips which fly out under the adze of the wood. For the chips may not drop on the earth. Once the tree is down, it is carried to the center of the temporary village, the greatest care being taken to prevent it from coming into contact with the ground. But when it is brought into the village, the houses are connected with the top of the mango by means of long vines decorated with streamers. In the afternoon, the fasting men and women begin to dance. The men bedescend with gay feathers, armlets, streamers, and anklets, the women flaunting in party-colored petticoats and sprigs of croton leaves, which wave from their waistbands as they dance. The dancing stops at sundown, and when the full moon rises over the shoulder of the eastern hill, for the date of the festival seems to be determined with reference to the time of the moon, 2 chiefs mount the gables of 2 houses on the eastern side of the square, and their dusky figures, standing sharply out against the moonlight, pray to the evil spirits to go away, go away, go away, and not to hurt the people. Next morning, pigs are killed by being speared as slowly as possible in order that they may squeal loud and long. For the people believe that the mango trees hear the squealing and are pleased at the sound and bear plenty of fruit. Whereas if they heard no squeals, they would bear no fruit. However, the trees have to content themselves with the squeals. The flesh of the pigs is eaten by the people. However, the trees have to content themselves with the squeals. The flesh of the pigs is eaten by the people. This ends the festival. Next day, the mango is taken down from the platform, wrapped in new mats, and carried by the fasting men to their sleeping house, where it is hung from the roof. But after an interval, it may be of many months, the tree is brought forth again. As to the reason for its reappearance, in public opinions are divided, but some say that the tree itself orders the master of the ceremonies to bring it forth, appearing to him in his dreams and saying, "Let me smell the smoke of fat of pigs, so will your pigs be healthy and your crops will grow."
Be that as it may, out it comes, conducted by the fasting men in their dancing costume, and with it come in the solemn procession all the pots, spoons, cups, and so forth, used by the fasting men during their period of holiness or taboo. Also, all the refuse of their food which has been collected for months, and all the fallen leaves and chips of the mango in their bundles of mats. These holy relics are carried in front, and the mango tree itself brings up the rear of the procession. While these sacred objects are being handed out of the house, the men who are present rush up, wipe off the hallowed dust which has accumulated on them and smeared over their own bodies, no doubt, in order to steep themselves in their blessed influence. No doubt. Thus the tree is carried as before to the center of the temporary village, care being taken not to let it touch the ground. Then one of the fasting men takes from a basket a number of young green mangoes, cuts them in pieces, and places them with his own hands in the mouths of his fellows. The other fasting men who chew the pieces small and turning round spit the morsels in the direction of the setting sun, in order that the sun should carry the mango bits. In order that the sun should carry the mango bits over the whole country, and everyone should know. A portion of the mango tree is then broken off, and in the evening it is burnt along with the bundles of leaves, chips, and refuse of food which have been stored up. What remains of the tree is taken to the house of the master of the ceremonies and hung over the fireplace. It will be brought out again at intervals and burned bit by bit till all is consumed, whereupon a new mango will be cut down and treated in like manner. The ashes of the holy fire on each occasion are gathered by the people and preserved in the house of the master of the ceremonies. The Melanesians of British New Guinea. The meaning of these ceremonies is not explained by the authorities who describe them, but we may conjecture that they are intended to fertilize the mango trees and cause them to bear a good crop of fruit. The central feature of the whole ritual is a wild mango tree, so young that it has never flowered. The men who cut it down, carry it into the village, and dance at the festival are forbidden to eat mangoes. Pigs are killed in order that their dying squeals may move the mango trees to bear fruit. At the end of the ceremonies, pieces of young green mangoes are solemnly placed in the mouths of the fasting men and are by them spurted out towards the setting sun, in order that the luminary may carry the fragments to every part of the country. And finally, when after a longer or shorter interval the tree is wholly consumed, its place is supplied by another. All these circumstances are explained simply and naturally by the supposition that the young mango tree is taken as a representative of mangoes generally, that the dances are intended to quicken it, and that it is preserved like a maypole of old in England, as a sort of general fund of vegetable life, till the fund being exhausted by the destruction of the tree, it is renewed by the importation of a fresh young tree from the forest. We can therefore understand why, as a storehouse of vital energy, the tree should be carefully kept from contact with the ground, lest the pent-up and concentrated energy should escape, and dribbling away into the earth, be dissipated to no purpose. To take other instances of what we may call the conservation of energy in magic or religion by insulating sacred bodies from the ground, the natives of New Britain have a secret society called the tuk-tuk, the members of which masquerade in petticoats of leaves and tall headdresses of wicker work shaped like candle extinguishers, which descend to the shoulders of the wearers, completely concealing their faces. Thus disguised, they dance about to the awe and terror, real or assumed, of the women and uninitiated who take or pretend to take them for spirits. When lads are being initiated into the secrets of this august society, the adepts cut down some very large and heavy bamboos, one for each lad, and the novices carry them carefully wrapped up in leaves to the sacred ground, where they arrive very tired and weary, for they may not let the bamboos touch the ground nor the sunshine on them. Outside the fence of the enclosure, every lad deposits his bamboo on a couple of forked sticks and covers it up with nut leaves. Among the carrier Indians of northwestern America, who burned their dead, the ashes of a chief used to be placed in a box and set on the top of a pole beside his hut. The box was never allowed to touch the ground. In the Omaha tribe of North American Indians, the sacred clamshell of the elk clan was wrapped up from sight in a mat, placed on a stand, and never suffered to come in contact with the earth. The Cherokees and kindred Indian tribes of the United States used to have certain sacred boxes or arks, which they regularly took with them to war. Such a holy ark consisted of a square wooden box which contained certain consecrated vessels made by beloved superannuated women, and of such various antiquated forms as would have puzzled Adam to have given significant names to each. The leader of a war party and his attendant bore the ark by turns, but they never set it on the ground, nor would they themselves sit on the bare earth while they were carrying it against the enemy. Where stones were plentiful, they rested the ark on them, but where no stones were to be found, they deposited it on short logs. The Indian ark is deemed so sacred and dangerous to be touched either by their own sanctified warriors or the spoiling enemy, that they durst not touch it upon any account. It is not to be meddled with by any, except the war chieftain and his waiter, under the penalty of incurring great evil. Nor would the most inveterate enemy touch it. In the woods, for the very same reason, after their return home, they used to hang the ark on the leader's red-painted war pole, war pole, war pole, war pole. At Sippy, near Simla, in northern India, an annual fair is held at which men purchase wives. A square box with a domed top figures prominently at the fair. It is fixed on 2 poles to be carried on men's shoulders, and long, heavily plaited petticoats hang from it nearly to the ground. 3 sides of the box are adorned with the head and shoulders of a female figure, and the 4th side with a black yak's tail. 4 men bear the poles, each carrying an axe in his right hand. They dance round, they dance round, they dance round, 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 round. They dance round, 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 they dance round with a swinging rhythmical step, with a swinging rhythmical step, to the music of drums and a pipe, to the music of drums and a pipe. The dance goes on for hours, and is thought to avert ill luck from the fair. It is said that the box is brought to Simla from a place 60 miles off by relays of men who may not stop nor set the box on the ground the whole way. In Scotland, when water was carried from sacred wells to sick people, the water vessel might not touch the earth. In some parts of Aberdeenshire, the last bunch of standing corn, which is commonly viewed as very sacred, being the last refuge of the corn spirit retreating before the reapers, is not suffered to touch the ground. The master or Guideman sits down and receives each handful of corn as it is cut on his lap. Again, sacred food may not under certain circumstances be brought into contact with the earth. Some of the Aborigines of Victoria used to regard the fat of the emu as sacred, believing that it had once been the fat of the black man. In taking it from the bird or giving it to another, they handle it reverently. Anyone who threw away the fat or flesh of the emu was held accursed. The late Mr. Thomas observed on one occasion at Nere, Warreen,
A remarkable exhibition of the effects of this superstition. An aboriginal child, one attending the school, having eaten some part of the flesh of an emu, threw away the skin. The skin fell on the ground, and this being observed by his parents, they showed by their gestures every token of horror. They looked upon their child as one utterly lost. His desecration of the bird was regarded as a sin for which there was no atonement. No atonement. The Romanians of Transylvania believed that every fresh baked loaf of wheaten bread is sacred, and should a piece inadvertently fall to the ground, it is hastily picked up, carefully wiped and kissed, and if soil thrown into the fire, partly as an offering to the dead, and partly because it were a heavy sin to throw away or tread upon any particle of it. At certain festivals in southeastern Borneo, the food which is consumed in the common house may not touch the ground. Hence, a little before the festivals take place, footbridges made of thin poles are constructed from the private dwellings to the common house. When Hall was living with the Eskimo and grew tired of eating walrus, one of the women brought the head and neck of a reindeer for him to eat. This venison had to be completely wrapped up before it was brought into the house, and once in the house it could only be placed on the platform which served as a bed. To have placed it on the floor or on the platform behind the fire lamp among the walrus, muskox, and polar bear meat, which occupy a good portion of both of these places, would have horrified the whole town, as according to the actual belief of the Inuits, not another walrus could be secured this year, and there would ever be trouble in catching any more. But in this case, the real scruple appears to have been felt not so much at placing the venison on the ground as at bringing it into contact with walrus meat. Sometimes magical implements and remedies are supposed to lose their virtue by contact with the ground, the volatile essence with which they are impregnated being no doubt drained off into the earth. Thus, in the Bulletin district of Queensland, the magical bone, which the native sorcerer points at his victim as a means of killing him, is never by any chance allowed to touch the earth. The wives of Rajas in Makassar, a district of southern Celebes, pride themselves on their luxuriant tresses and are at great pains to oil and preserve them. Should the hair begin to grow thin, the lady resorts to many devices to stay the ravages of time. Among other things, she applies to her locks a fat extracted from crocodiles and venomous snakes. The unguent is believed to be very efficacious, but during its application, the woman's feet must not come into contact with the ground, or all the benefit of the nostrum would be lost. Ethnological studies among the northwest central Queensland Aborigines. The custom of killing a man by pointing a bone or stick at him, while the sorcerer utters appropriate curses, is common among the tribes of Central Australia. But amongst them, there seems to be no objection to place the bone or stick on the ground. On the contrary, an Arunta wizard inserts the bone or stick in the ground while he invokes death and destruction on his enemy. Some people in antiquity believed that a woman in hard labor would be delivered if a spear, which had been wrenched from a man's body without touching the ground, were thrown over the house where the sufferer lay. Again, according to certain ancient writers, arrows which had been extracted from a body without coming into contact with the earth and laid under sleepers acted as a love charm. Among the peasantry of the northeast of Scotland, the prehistoric weapons called celts went by the name of thunderbolts and were coveted as the sure bringers of success, always provided that they were not allowed to fall to the ground. As to the superstitions attaching to stone, arrowheads, and axe heads, celts, commonly known as thunderbolts, in the British Islands, see W.W. Skeet, Snake Stones and Stone Thunderbolts, Folklore, 1912. And as to such superstitions in general, see C.H.R. Blinkenberg, The Thunder Weapon in Religion and Folklore, Cambridge, 1911. In ancient Gaul, certain glass or paste beads attained great celebrity as amulets under the name of serpents' eggs. It was believed that serpents, coiling together in a wriggling, writhing mass, generated them from their slaver and shot them into the air from their hissing jaws. If a man was bold and dexterous enough to catch one of these eggs in his cloak before it touched the ground, he rode off on horseback with it at full speed, pursued by the whole pack of serpents till he was saved by the interposition of a river which the snakes could not pass. The proof of the egg being genuine was that if it were thrown into a stream, it would float up against the current, even though it were hooped in gold. The Druids held these beads in high esteem. According to them, the precious objects could only be obtained on a certain day of the moon, and the peculiar virtue that resided in them was to secure success in lawsuits and free access to kings.